Hello and welcome back. So in this part we're going to work on the actual final scene outputs and the render outputs and try and get this into Photoshop soon for some post. So we're going to do three different versions. We're going to do a day shot, which is basically what we've been seeing when we've been developing this scene, with the light flooding in through the gaps top and bottom. Then we're going to do a shot with a photometric light lighting the scene from the downlighters. And then finally we're going to do just a candle shot. So I'm not going to go over too much the day shot setup because we've already seen how the lights have been positioned, etc. You'll see the scene since the last time I've just gone through and I've just basically fleshed out some of the more assets on the wall there, and I've put a couple of plants in. Now these are all got from the asset store on the Luxology site, all the actual assets within the sort of modo installation. There's nothing actually been made there by me, so it's just for me to deck out the room a bit more. The only thing I did make was loads of these little like flower petals, and you can see just basically a quad, and I just used the sculpt tools just to make some bumps on it, and then it's just got a leaf picture on it, leaf texture, and a sort of a opacity map, just so it sort of maps out. It sort of cuts out these black areas around it, so we just see the flower petal itself. You can just see it there. Now these could have been done. All these are individual objects within the actual scene. If we go down to petals, they could have been just one and then all instances, but I actually went around and made everyone different bumps, so you can't really see it. But if we do some close-up shots, it's nice to everyone be different as opposed to they all be obvious copies. But you could have saved geo memory and things by just making them instances. Also, I've added a towel in, which also just came from the asset share store on the Luxology website, but I've got it disabled. If you turn it on, then to be honest, you're going to need about 9 gig of RAM to render this scene out. It takes up the scene polys from about 1.3 million to about 20 million, so that's such an intensive asset there. I'll turn it on for my final renders because I've got 16 gig of RAM here, but you may, depend on your scene, your system, you may want to leave that turned off. The other thing I've done, I've just gone around basically and I've added, you can see we had one item camera before, I've just added another one there. So we've got one scene camera, which is the overall scene. I've got one item camera looking at the bath, and I've got this item camera here, because to be honest, sometimes the close-ups are actually better than the full scene. So they're the shots. They're the three shots we're going to use. Okay, we'll jump over to the shader tree, and we'll start looking at the render outputs. So at the moment we've got an alpha output and the final color output, and they're basically the standard outputs you get with any scene. And if you come up to the eye view here and you go to effects, you can flick between them and you can sort of see what the output actually is. So we need to add a few more in just so we can do things in Photoshop at the end in post-production, and save doing them within the actual scene. Things like depth of field. If you want to add depth of field, you can obviously come over to the scene cameras here, camera effects, and you can enable depth of field. But we're going to do that more at I'm just going to make sure the focus distances are right. But like I said, we're not going to use depth of field within. I'll just pause that, go and save some refresh time. We're not going to use depth of field within the actual render itself. We're going to have a little play around with that in post. There's other things you can do like depth of field, like I say, and if you want to add fog and mist to this room and that, we can do them in post as well by adding some nice render outputs. So basically we've got these ones as standard. I'm going to rename this one Final Color Low Dynamic Range. We know it's low range because low dynamic range, sorry, because we've got we're clamping the colours here to 1. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to change this one to high dynamic range. And this will just give us a bit more room to play around with in post. So in that one I'm going to turn the clamp colours off. So I've got one with clamp colours on, LDR, and one with clamp colours off. Okay, I'm going to come up to add layer. I'm going to add a new render output. And I'm going to change this one to depth. Now this is the one we can use when we're adding fog and depth of field, etc. I'm going to just switch over to the scene cam. And in the eye view here, the effect, I'm going to turn it to my depth output. And you'll see the effect there. Now basically what I want is I want the furthest item away, which is the back wall of this recessed piece here, in the darkest shade of grey. So if we click on the depth output and we come in here, you can see the maximum depth is 10. So if I just change this to 5 meters, you'll see none of the back wall is actually visible anymore. So we want to just have some visibility from the back wall, but we want it in the darkest shade of red. We don't want it sort of bleached and washed out. So we know that's basically the extent of the room there. So I'm going to do it about 5.78 in my instance. So you can see the pictures. It's basically going from white to black there. And like I say, we can use this then for adding depth of field and fog and things in post. I'm going to add another render output, and we change one to ambient occlusion. You can see in the moment all it does is takes into account the geometry and the sort of ambient light within the scene. So we haven't got a great deal of light within our scene. We've got no environmental light as such. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to change this occlusion depth to 0.5 a meter. And as you can see, it's a far better effect already. An alternative, see if you go up to 1 meter. And this is basically the distance that the rays bounce around. This will add a bit of, this is useful, ambient occlusion is very useful when you're making game assets. For actually sort of griming things up and adding sort of wear and tear to nooks and crannies in sort of game objects. It's a nice way of sort of faking sort of shadows as a way. So I don't want it quite that dark, so I'm going to basically I'll go to 0.5 there and just see. Okay, we might not even use the ambient occlusion, but it's if you don't need to render it out, then don't obviously include it within your render outputs here. And you'll know for yourself when you start working on your own workflow which of these you actually use and which you don't use. These are the sort of the standard ones I sort of normally do as part of the course. Whether we use them all within Photoshop or not is another matter. And I'm going to bump up the rays to 200. Now this rendering out the ambient occlusion layer is going to be the most computationally intensive render output we're adding here, so obviously look into whether you actually need this or not. Okay, we're going to add another render output, and this one I'm going to change to reflection shading. Now this just gives us a way of being able to boost any reflections we have in post and have sort of control over it, so you can see anything that is reflective, like a bit on the toilets here and the bidets and the radiator, and obviously the reflection in the mirror there. So this is a nice way of just giving us control over the reflections. We're going to add another render output. And this one I'm going to change to diffuse shading direct. And this will just give us a nice way of boosting any sort of sunlight, in our case, in post. we're going to add one more. I'm going to change this one to Subsurface. Subsurface shading. And this will give us a way of tweaking any items with subsurface on in our scene. And that's things like the candles. There's not a lot of light within our scene, so there's not a great deal of visual things to see in here. And we're just going to add one more. And this is going to be shadow density. And this will just give us a way of tweaking any shadows if we need to when we get to post. Okay. I'm going to go up to the render tab. One thing to note when you're doing your final renders is you want to basically boost up the frame width and height basically as high as you can. Because if you think about it, when you're rendering this out, you can see the buckets here are sort of 32 pixels. So when it comes to render, 32 pixels may be the size of the whole taps, especially on this back wall here, the detail on this back wall. 32 pixels by 32 pixels may encompass that whole area there. So obviously when you're rendering, that means all this information here, these two taps and the wall, is only going to be 32 pixels. Whereas if you're rendering something at about 3000 pixels wide, you may even have like 100 pixels across this back wall. So basically you want to boost this up as much as you can. Now, dependent on your system at home, you're obviously going to have a massive hit when you're outputting at large frames, but if you can bear the thought of the electricity burning overnight, you can just set it before you go to bed and see it when you wake up. So I'm going to hit the percentage sign here because I know the actual frame width and height, the proportions are right, because we set that up when we made the cameras. But I just want to boost it all proportionally, so I'm going to use this percentage symbol there, and I'm going to go up to 3000 pixels wide. Now you can even go high. You may even, if you're doing especially if you're doing a render for any sort of print, you may want to go up to, in the thousands. I've seen people go up to like 16,000 pixels. But for our renders, I'm going to go up to 3000 now. Okay, the anti-aliasing, make sure you've got it on box. I find for architectural visualizations, box gives the best outcome, the most crispest and cleanest. And I'm going to bring up the samples from 32 all the way up to 256. Okay, in the global illumination, I'm going to leave F pretty much as we've been using it so far. I'm going to add just one more indirect bounce. So yet again, it's going to take another performance hit. And I'm just going to bring these rays up just a wee bit. The irradiance rate, I'm going to bring down to 1 pixel. And the ratio up to about 10. You'll notice also in here, I've got a save irradiance file ticked. And I'm actually just opening that to my external drive there, just so when we come back, you'll be fine that when you're rendering these out, the actual calculating the irradiance cache takes longer than the actual buckets going around rendering. So once you get the frame size and you get basically the lighting set up as you want, the irradiance cache isn't really going to change between renders. So if you start tweaking some of these other variables, you don't really want to have to keep rendering that whole, so it's going to take probably a couple of hours just to calculate the irradiance cache. So what we'll do, the first time we render it, we'll select save irradiance cache, and then any subsequent renders we use, I'm just going to turn it off and stick on load, and then that'll basically just load the irradiance cache in, and that's basically done in no time at all. The other thing I'm going to do, just to make things extra special just for this final render, I'm going to come down to this base shader here, and the shading rate I'm going to drop down. If you pull this little button down here, you can see at the moment we're getting 1 sample per pixel, and you can go up to 16 sample pixels, or you can go up to right up to 100. And this is as fine as you can go. It might be too big a hit for your systems. It's worth a go, but just see how your machine's performing. Okay, so we're ready to go. So I'll pause the video now, and that's the end of the daytime shot. You'll find the results within the render outputs folder in the tutorial files there, so you can see it. And then we'll revisit all these again, and we'll show you these final outputs when we get into the post-production phase within Photoshop. So when we come back in the next part, we'll start working on the next version of this, which is the one with the photometric lights. So I'll see you back for that part. Bye for now.